That was some solid racing yesterday to open up the round of 12. Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Kansas Speedway, one of the most entertaining mile-and-a-half tracks that we go to in the circuit. The restarts are so much fun. The 3 and 4 wide action is exhilarating. And the battles for the lead on long runs doesn't get any better than this. And yesterday we opened up the round of 12 at this phenomenal racetrack with some thrilling racing all day long. And at the end of the day, one driver who didn't even make the playoffs plays the spoiler. Let's get into all that went down. Number 1. Chastain returns to victory lane. That's right, Ross Chastain picks up his first win of the season, winning yesterday's Hollywood Casino 400 at Kansas, holding off William Byron, Martin Truex Jr., Ryan Blaney, and Ty Gibbs for the victory. So good to have the Melon Man back in victory lane. It's been a rough year for Ross Chastain and the number 1 team at Trackhouse Racing. At the beginning of the year, you expected this team to be a playoff contender, winning some races and being up front competing for wins on a daily basis. Well, that has not been the case this year. They've definitely had their struggles with not a lot of good performance from the race cars, having things go against them that weren't necessarily out of their control, just having some rough races, especially during the summer months where they lost a lot of points in a lot of spots while other guys kept winning. They just kept losing their momentum. They tried the last race of the regular season to make the playoffs by taking an alternate strategy late in the race, which didn't work out in their favor and would have been better if it had happened perhaps on the last restart of the race. Maybe it was, say, 10 laps to go. But doing it 30 laps prior was pretty a rough decision and kind of hurt them in the very end. And unfortunately, Ross Chastain was not able to qualify for the playoffs this year. But that doesn't mean that this one team can just, pout and moan the rest of the season. They got to finish strong in preparation for next year. And they did just that, returning to victory lane yesterday at Kansas. Well, they started in the middle of the pack and kind of ran there for the beginning part of the race around the top 15 for the most part. Then he got towards the top 10 at the beginning of stage number 2. Pretty much hung there the rest of that stage, and then by the time we got to the final stage, he got up inside the top 5 and was racing for the lead with a lot of guys. Took the lead from Carson Hocevar at the beginning of the final stage. Then he had some thrilling battles against the likes of Martin Truex Jr. and Kyle Busch. I mean, those battles that those guys had in the long runs had me on the edge of my seat to see which one of these guys were going to be able to come on top, because those 3 guys were all, either didn't make the playoffs or had already been eliminated from playoff contention. But, Chastain has nice, clean battles with the 8 car yesterday late in the race. And then, of course, there were some cautions, which included the 8 car spinning. And then everybody ducked down pit road to get one more set of fresh tires. And on the restart, Chastain briefly lost the lead to Martin Truex Jr., but then quickly retained it back prior to a wreck on the backstretch, the last caution of the race. And that set Chastain on the front row alongside Alex Bowman. But Chastain got the better restart going into turn 1 and was able to pull away despite William Byron charging from behind, trying to take the win away from him. Chastain did not hold back whatsoever and was able to pull through and get his first win of the season. And of course, we all know the signature celebration that Ross Chastain does every time he wins a race. He gets a watermelon and gets to smash it right on the front straightaway and celebrate with the fans. And he had himself a long burnout as well, because it's been a long time since Chastain won a race, and it was dating back to last year's regular championship finale at Phoenix last year, where he played the spoiler, winning the race in front of the guy who would eventually win the championship, and Ryan Blaney. And of course, now with the one team, of course, they did make the playoffs. This win definitely gives them some momentum heading in towards the end of the season and preparations to try to get better for next year. I know what this one team is capable of. Ever since Chastain joined this team in 2022, they were a contender week in and week out, mainly in the storylines, for good and for bad, showing how competitive he was, but also bad because of maybe how, hard he was racing against his other competitors, being a little too aggressive, and a lot of people have criticized him for the way he races other people. Well, this year he took a step back from his aggressiveness, but probably maybe a little too far, and that's what's kind of led them to the position that they were, not being able to make the playoffs. But this win certainly puts behind the rough patch that they've had this season behind them and gives them some momentum heading towards the end of the season and getting ready for next year as well. So a big congratulations to Ross Chastain and the one team on their impressive win yesterday. Number 2, Byron falls short of locking himself into the next round. William Byron needed that one spot that Ross Chastain had at the end of yesterday's race. He needed to get that win so he could lock himself into the round of 8. But despite that, it was a great performance by the 2014. They had a great car yesterday, pretty much led the Hendrick camp all day long. They were competitive at the beginning of stage 1, took the lead with under 10 to go in the stage, with Christopher Bell, who was leading the time and was being hounded by the 24 car. He smacked the wall and lost the lead in the process, and that let Byron take the stage win from the 20 car, and that helped him give an extra bonus point because you don't know what's going to happen in any of these next 2 races that we have in this round. In the stage number 2, he stayed within the top 5, was not able to get another stage win. However, I think he fell short to Alex Bowman, his teammate. And in the final stage, he fell behind a little bit, but still had a really good race car, particularly in the long runs. And those last few restarts, he was able to pick himself up from where he was and got up to second place. And even though he tried everything he could those last few laps to get the 1 car, he just couldn't close the deal and close up the gap to try to find a way to get by him. He took one last dive into turn number 3 to try to have a shot to get the 1 car for the lead and eventual win, but unfortunately it did not work his way, and therefore he ends up with a second place finish. But he leads everybody in the playoff standings right now after yesterday's race, 34 above the cutoff, heading into next weekend at Talladega. Now, is that a comfortable position? Certainly not, because with these next 2 races being the ultimate wild cards of this round, you just don't know what will happen. But this result definitely helps him and gives him some momentum and a little bit of a cushion, because if he comes away with a solid result or even better win next week, he'll feel really good about his position going forward. So despite falling short, it was a great performance by Byron and the 24 team yesterday. Number 3, Busch suffers another heartbreak. Yesterday, Kyle Busch was so close to breaking the winless streak and getting back to victory lane and keeping the streak of winning every single time he's been a full-time Cup driver yesterday. It just didn't work out in the very end of the race. Kyle Busch had a really good race car yesterday, hanging around the top 10 for a lot of the race, and by the time we got to the final stage, he became a factor, racing up at the front, competing with Ross Chastain, Byron, Martin Truex Jr., Bowman, and others for the race lead. It definitely looked like yesterday could have been the day for Kyle Busch at a track where in his early tenure in the Cup Series, he did not like Kansas at all. The last couple years, it's gotten better for him, and of course, he's won some races, and it's been much more competitive and been on the better end than most other people have been. But unfortunately, the end of the race yesterday, unfortunately, Lady Luck yielded a bad hand on Kyle Busch, as while he was racing against the 1 car Ross Chastain after green flag pit stops, Kyle was trying to lap Chase Briscoe, one of the playoff drivers who was struggling for a lot of yesterday, and he was trying to stay on the lead lap. Busch ran a little bit of a higher lane in turn 2, and unfortunately he grazed the wall, lost control of the car, and spun around, thus bringing out a caution, and prematurely ending Kyle's chances to have a shot at winning yesterday and getting back to victory lane. Even though he restarted inside the top 5, I think the condition of the car after the spin really hurt him, and he slid from 5th on that last restart back to 19th place. Ouch. That sucks. And in his interview, obviously, he was very disappointed considering how good of a car he had all race yesterday. And, it felt like he wanted to say something in his post-race interview, but he kept it to himself and just held back. But he definitely showed, a little bit of a disappointment and just, frustration, not as far as, short-term answers. He just expressed how disappointed he was because he felt like he had a shot yesterday. And I feel for the guy. I mean, not many people would have said this years ago when he was one of the most polarizing figures in the sport. Now he's become more likable, and I feel for Kyle Busch. I mean, the guy's just had no luck this year. I mean, think about it. The last 2 races of the regular season, he has opportunities to win to make the playoffs. Gets passed by Harrison Burton on the last lap on the back straightaway, and then despite a challenge late to try to chase down Chase Briscoe, it is not enough for him to make the playoffs. And that's what left Kyle Busch outside the playoffs this year, and not, also including the struggles that he had during the summer stretch this year with no luck and a lot of wrecks is just uncharacteristic by KB. But it was a great performance by him yesterday, but the result and the outcome just didn't work Kyle Busch's way. Number 4, playoff adversity. A lot of our playoff drivers had to overcome adversity yesterday, while some dealt with adversity and never recovered. It was a pretty rough start for some of our guys in the round of 12. Let's kick things off with our defending Cup champion, Ryan Blaney, where he finished with a 4th place result. And in the past, the Kansas Speedway for Blaney and the Penske cars, particularly with this next-gen car, hadn't gone their way. But yesterday, things worked well in the 12 car and Ryan Blaney. They ran top 5 a lot of the race. Then at the beginning of the final stage, he had to pit earlier than everybody else because he complained about a loose wheel. He came in and it looked like if things had gone green the rest of the way and we didn't have that spin by Kyle Busch, Blaney would have had to pit again and would have been 12 laps shy of the finish, and he'd have to pit late and would have cost himself a really good result. But the Kyle Busch spin saved the 12 team. Were able to come down pit road with everybody else to put on one more set of fresh tires and allow Blaney to hang on and get a solid 4th place finish and give him a solid cushion ahead of the playoff cut line entering next weekend. So good job by the 12 team. Then there's Christopher Bell, who had by far earlier in the race yesterday the best car. Was so strong, he led the most laps at 122, but unfortunately some skirmishes with the wall really prevented him from having a chance to win. As I mentioned, the end of stage 1, it looked like he was going to win the stage, but with under 10 laps to go, he scrapes the wall in turn 2. Byron and multiple others get by Bell, and Bell loses a chance to win that stage. Then in stage 2, he's up at the front of the restart, but has a moment getting high in turn 4 and lost a lot of spots in the process, and he didn't even score stage points when he had that moment at the end of stage 2. Some pretty, big errors by the 20 team and uncharacteristic errors prevented him from having a chance to get more points than they probably could have come away with yesterday. Despite that, he was able to rally and get back and finish inside the top 10, but Bell and the 20 team are definitely going to look back and thinking, we missed an opportunity to get a bunch of points from yesterday's race. And then we have NASCAR's most popular driver, Chase Elliott. He had to start dead last yesterday because during practice on Saturday, his engine was not up to speed, and they knew right then and there that they were going to have to make an engine change. They had a slow qualifying lap, so he had started at the back at 38th place. At the beginning of the race, he made a big pass to the outside and was barely ahead of a wreck that happened on lap number 1 on the back straightaway. He was able to get by despite a little, brush with the wall. He was fine, was able to kind of slowly work his way up through the field, was able to get some stage points at the end of stage number 2. And then the last caution, in the last few cautions, they had some slow stops, but were able to charge their way back up inside the top 10 and get a 9th place result. Given what they had to deal with yesterday, a 9th place result, got to feel pretty good about it. Not content, but they feel pretty good about it because they leave 4 points above the cutoff line after that performance yesterday. While those guys had some good results despite some adversity, others were not so fortunate. How about Kyle Larson, the guy who last time we were here in the spring won the closest finish in NASCAR history ahead of Chris Buescher? Early on in stage 1 yesterday, he hit the outside wall in turns 1 and 2 because he ran over something that cut the right rear tire and damaged the rear part of his diffuser. Kyle Larson was not competitive the rest of the race. Well, they were foul lap down, did some repair work and got their laps back, but they were never able to be up there, competing in the top 10 at all yesterday after that early incident in stage 1. Kyle ended up finishing in 26th spot. But with the playoff points he's accumulated, with wins and stage wins, he still is above the cutoff line. But, man, if they somehow get eliminated in this round, they're going to look back on this race and thinking this race really started it for us as far as being possibly out. But we still have 2 races to go. We got to see how it works out for the 5 team. But then we have Chase Briscoe. They qualified well, but they were not good in practice, and the racing, speed that they had in practice showed up in the race yesterday. They were not competitive. They never sniffed the top 10 at all after qualifying inside the top 10, and he ended up finishing deep in the pack. It was a bad race for the 14 team and Chase Briscoe, pretty much putting them in a must-win situation going forward. So those guys definitely did not have the best days, and neither did a few other guys. Tyler Reddick struggled badly yesterday. I did not expect that from him, particularly this racetrack. He finished in 25th spot. Austin Cindric had a spin, and he fell out of the race. He didn't fall out of the race, but he finished a lap down deep in the pack. And rough races for guys like Joey Logano and Suarez, where they finished top 15 with cars that just weren't with them yesterday. So a tough day for a lot of our playoff drivers. Even though some were able to overcome adversity and finish well, others were not so fortunate. And number 5, the racing at Kansas. It's always fun every time we come to this track with this next-gen car. It's been very competitive every time we put this car on the track, and yesterday was no different. It was very entertaining racing from the get-go. Now, did we have the close, exciting finish that we had in the spring? No. But did we have some good battles all day long for the lead, middle of the pack, and on the restarts? Absolutely. Again, it wasn't the best Kansas race. It was a solid above average race that you get at this racetrack with good competitive racing all day long. The tire fall off definitely played a factor for guys that were able to pick their way up and pass guys on the longer runs. Guys on the short runs were able to get some distance before maybe we get into a long run. Tires come up to temperature and they begin to fall off and fade back. But it was a good race nonetheless yesterday. Some good battles, a good crowd yesterday. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun to watch these guys go head to head. And some of these playoff drivers having to go from the back to the front to the back to the front. A lot of that happened yesterday. A fair amount of parity in the race at Kansas. Now we are off to Talladega Superspeedway, which is one of the ultimate wild cards in the playoffs, and it has been ever since we started the playoffs back in 2004. This 2.66 mile track has these guys bunched together racing at almost over 190 miles per hour, 2 wide, 3 wide, maybe even 4 wide. Heck, you could even do 5 wide at this track, although nobody's really attempted it with this car yet. But I expect a very competitive race next week, especially with all the lead changes that we get with this next-gen car. Could we have an exciting, entertaining finish like we've seen in many, many years that we've come to Talladega? Quite possibly. But there's also the possibility of the big one. And for these playoff drivers, you do not want to find yourself, if there is a massive wreck next week, you do not want to find yourself being a part of that, or you'll find yourself in a deep hole entering the last race of the round of 12. So it's imperative that these guys in the playoffs come away next week in one piece. Even better, winning would solve a lot of the problems. So who will come out on top next week? Will it be Tyler Reddick, who won this race in the spring for the boss man Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin? Will someone say Brad Keselowski, Michael Baddello, Chris Buescher, guys that are no longer in the playoffs or didn't make the playoffs, play the ultimate, underdogs role? We shall find out, but I guarantee you, in Sweet Home Alabama next week, where those guys will hopefully be so blue, it'll be a competitive one from start to finish. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Subscribe, like, and congrats once again to Ross Chastain and the One Team on their impressive win yesterday at Kansas. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!